For my psychology thesis recently, I looked at pagans or neo-pagans, to give it a more technical term, and especially those who identified as having a primary deity or a patron or a matron deity, a deity that they were connected to above all others, even though they worked with and were connected to or believed in lots of deities. So whilst the thesis itself has some really interesting information within it, it's not a fascinating read. It's not something that you would sit and want to spend a lot of time going through. So what I'd like to do is to really bring some of that information out and bring out this subject area so that people can see the experience of neo-pagans or just pagans working with a primary deity. What do we really gain from our deities? What's that connection that we have to them? And because in this piece of work I no longer have to be academic, I thought I'd start by describing my experience, talking through the way I connect to my primary deity. And my primary deity is the Norse goddess Freyja. And interviewing all those people for my thesis really did help me to really explore and look again at my connection to Freyja, at what it is that drives me for all these years to have that special closeness with one deity over all others. And I do have close relationships with other deities as well. So I work very closely with the goddess Hel, particularly through my Seath work. And I also have a strong connection with the god Odin. But Freyja for me has always been the one that has been right at the forefront, the one that if anybody asks me who I worship or who I work with, then that would be the name right on the tip of my tongue. And my dedication to Freyja. So the point where I stopped seeing her just as a deity and started seeing her as an important part of my life and an important part of my spirituality came while I was at university. So while I was at university was the first time I heard the word pagan. And it was through the pagan society there that I started to understand that the witchcraft that I'd been learning about was part of a much bigger tradition. At university, I also met Wiccan people who later initiated me, and I explored things like heathenry and druidry and really kind of connected and committed myself to being and identifying as a pagan. And whilst I knew people who identified as having a primary deity, one deity that they worked with closer than others, and whilst there was this concept of a male deity and a female deity and the importance of God and goddess, I didn't really see myself as having one deity. I worked with both Frigga and Freyja. I worked with Demeter. I worked with Persephone. But it wasn't until I was planning on leaving university, it wasn't until that transition between this very closeted space of living in a house just outside of campus, not having to do very much apart from studying, and we had also a site that we used on campus. So we actually had a ritual site that the university had provided us. Only in West Wales, I think you could say here. But for me, transitioning from this very kind of closeted university way of life, knowing that I was going to have to go to work, knowing that I was going to have to be responsible for paying my rent. And unlike at university, if I didn't pay it, then I wasn't immediately thrown out of the house. Living a life where I would have to pay my rent, I would have to pay my bills, and I would have to be working in order to do so. I recognised that this transition was important. And as part of this transition, I made an agreement. I dedicated myself to the goddess Freyja. And as I dedicated myself to her, I made almost this Gifu rune exchange where I said, Freyja, I need you. I need to be comfortable financially. I need to have everything that I need, but I also want to have nice things as well. I want to be able to just go and buy things when I want them as well as when I need them. So if you provide me with everything I need and all the nice things I want, and you make sure that I have comfort and wealth and money, then I will do your work for you. I will do the work of the witch. I will write about witchcraft. I will write this book on Seath, which even back then I decided that I was going to do. All of these things that take time and you can't do as easily when you're at work as you can when you're at university. I will make sure that I make time for these things, but I need you to give me this idea of security and finance and just nice stuff so that I'm not without while I do your work. So, of course, this connection, this very transactional agreement that I made with Freyja, I don't think I really sort of thought through in the terms of the rest of my life. And I also don't think I really thought through it in terms of how you approach a deity respectfully. So I have recognized since those years ago that I am neurodivergent. So that might explain the way that I didn't have any social skills when dealing with deities, just in the same way as I lacked social skills dealing with people. So, over the last 20 odd years since that point, my connection with Freyja has changed. It's deepened. And while I still do her work and she still makes sure that I'm not worrying about money or worrying about security or anything like that, there is a lot more to it than simply this very transactional, you do this and I will do this. And my life ebbs and flows, as does my time that I have to be with Freyja and to spend time doing Freyja's work. So, as my life ebbs and flows, as I need to put more time into study, I need to put more time into work sometimes, need to put more time into parenting sometimes, my relationship with Freyja, my connection with Freyja, doesn't have to be full on all the time. And it doesn't have to be so that I always have an altar or I always do meditations or I'm constantly evangelicizing about my deity. So the way that I connect with Freyja has changed over the years, but the intensity and the deepness and the amount of support and the amount of comfort that I gain from having this deity connection hasn't changed. This is still something that is incredibly important to me, and perhaps much, much more important than it was when I made that throwaway promise, that throwaway exchange over 20 years ago. So, one thing that really came out within the thesis and within the research that I did was this sense of our deities, our primary deities, being a secure base for us attachment wise. And basically, what the secure base is within attachment theory is Mary Ainsworth basically identified that children, or babies in particular, were really happy to go and explore and to see the world and to go and have fun with other babies and play with toys if they always knew that they had that secure base to come back to. So the babies may test it sometimes. They may come back, yep, my mum's still there. I'm going off again. And that sense of that secure base, that ability to always have your caregiver available for you when you needed them, meant that they were a lot more confident and a lot more able to live outside of their caregiver. But the importance of that secure base, the importance of their caregiver always being there, created a much, much more confident child. And there was lots of other things about attachment that we experienced and that we realized within the thesis. But for me, this concept of the secure base is something that your primary deity can do for you. So whatever else is going on in my life, whatever kind of connection I have to jobs, whatever connection I have to family, whatever connection I have to relationships, however good or bad any of these friendships and relationships are, having that secure base, having that secure attachment with my deity, with Freyja, is that sense of feeling safe. It allows me to explore, it allows me to be more confident, and allows me to trust starting connections to friends, to partners. It gives me that sense of a secure base to be from. And for me, that is very, very important. I no longer have living parents. That security from a deity, that security from an everlasting connection is very important to me. So part of my connection to Freyja and part of the real benefits that this gives me within my life is the ability to form a secure base. Another thing my research participants really explored and talked about was the way that their deity allowed them to see parts of themselves or to represent parts of themselves. So somebody may start working with or start a connection with a deity at the point where they were looking at wanting to fulfill a different role in life, or it may allow them permission to be a different kind of mask, to show a different face, or to really discover who they are in their core. Being connected to a deity and seeing yourself within the deity really allows this and helps a person to explore aspects of their own personality. So is Freyja like me? Freyja is a really kind of strong deity to choose for yourself. She's a deity with lots of real kind of feminine power, lots of strength, and lots of real kind of mythology around her. When you say Freyja is my patron, people have an expectation of who you are and what you're like immediately. And this may be connected with the Freyja that I recognise, or it might be connected with almost an Arthur Rackham kind of Freyja, the Freyja that we see in a very feminine way. So for me, this aspect of being like Freyja is also for me being misunderstood a lot of the time, being shown to be in one way, having people having expectations of me that I may not see within myself. Freyja is the goddess of battle, of witchcraft, of sexuality. Everything that she represents is both strong but also a certain kind of feminine. So it's a real sort of roaring tide kind of femininity rather than the gentle springs kind of femininity. But sometimes Freyja will be described as the goddess of love or the goddess of beauty. And these are things that I don't think are really reflected within the literature in the same way as the battle and the witchcraft and the raw sexuality is. So if we look at love, I think sometimes Freyja is connected with love because we want to make her like Aphrodite. We want to add her to Venus. We want to see her in that realm. But in terms of love, I don't know that Freyja really represented love. There's nothing to me that really describes her as being a love goddess, even though she's referred to as such. We also see Freyja as being the goddess of beauty, and also referred to as the goddess of fertility. Well, it's debated whether or not Freyja had children. So fertility is very much based around children. Fertility is based around the land, and Freyja's brother, was far more connected with fertility of the land, with the youth of human beings and the everlasting ambrosia of the gods. Then that was, of course, Idun and her apples. So if we look at this, there's less of a fertility aspect with Freyja. It'd be very interesting to see where people's idea of fertility has come from. And coming back to beauty, beauty, in fact, was more of a male attribute than a female attribute within the Norse. And in fact, it can also be said that beauty was more of a male attribute within the Greek as well. So although Helen of Troy was described as being beautiful and everything going wrong because of her beauty, most of the people that were referred to beautiful and most of the concepts of beauty, particularly physical beauty, were seen as male attributes. And it was the same very much in the Norse. So we didn't have this idea of women being beautiful and that was their role. We actually had more of an idea of women being cunning and wise and able to solve problems and able to help you think through issues. So the idea of Freyja being the goddess of beauty is confusing, particularly because Balder the Beautiful had more of a standing as the god of beauty. So would we really have needed a god of beauty and a goddess of beauty? So Freyja's attributes are often confused, and she's often made to be more kind of traditionally female qualities that we can see as stereotypical female qualities within our society than she was. And I feel that this is something that I feel a real affinity with Freyja. So I don't like to be identified as beauty and love and fertility. I like to be thought of as battle and witchcraft. So, and clever and being able to solve problems. So I think for me, Freyja gives me permission in many ways to embrace the roaring tide femininity rather than the still water femininity. But having said that, I do work with Freyja for abundance. I work with Freyja to make sure that I have what I need and to just pick up pretty things like the Brisingamen necklace, for example. So Freyja to me is a deity that I invoke when I'm working Seath, a deity that I connect with when I want to feel that I have strength, when I want to feel energy, when I want to feel motivated. She's a deity that I would invoke if I wanted to do anything kind of pagan work or, witch based. So Freyja to me is that secure base, but she's also a deity that represents much of the things I need to do. And I guess that transactional beginning of our connection really doesn't do it justice. And in the same way as if you have a friend or a partner and somebody is asking you to explain the way you feel about them, you don't start with, well, they do this for me and this for me and this for me. That would be weird. Although it's true that your friend and partner do things for you and you do things for them because that's how relationships and attachments work, but there's deeper than that. That connection is about so much more than what that person gives you or what you give them, and that will ebb and flow through the years. And the deep connection that you feel, that security of attachment, that strength of belonging, that strength of connection, is what you hold on to with long-term friendships, with long-term partnerships. And that's in many ways how I feel about Freyja. She is part of my support network. She's part of how I think about myself. My energy and her energy is part of this big web. Me being a devotee of Freyja, even though I don't tend to use the words devotee and worship, but my connection with Freyja is part of who I am. It's part of how I identify.